Antony and Cleopatra, Rome and Egypt. How does Shakespeare set about dramatising the opposition between Rome and Egypt, the associations that each country, each culture has? Well, obviously, one way that he can do it is through costume, Roman military tunics against flowing Egyptian robes. He can also do it through music, drum rolls for the Roman army, languorous music for Egyptian pleasures. But he also achieves it through his poetic imagery. One of the things that is truly great about Shakespeare, and that sets him apart from the other dramatists of his time, is the sustained way in which he uses clusters of poetic imagery to create ideas. Characterization and theme are achieved through linguistic patterns. And I want to try to show you something of what I mean by this. If you think about the language associated with Rome in the play, Rome, the imperial force, often it's a very sort of hard language. The triple pillar of the world is an image that's used for the three triumvirs, Octavius, Antony, and Lepidus, the three men who are ruling the world. Let Rome in Tiber melt and the wide arch of ranged empire fall, says Antony when he goes to Egypt. The wide arch of ranged empire. Rome, of course, was famous for its classical arches, its classical architecture. It's stony, symmetrical, solid, hard. When Antony says, let Rome in Tiber melt, he's saying, let the hard imagery of Rome soften into liquid, molten imagery. Tiber, the river running through Rome, somehow at this point gives way to Nile, the river running through Egypt. There's a lovely image I found here in the library of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust that, for me, sort of conjures up this opposition between hard and soft and Rome and Egypt. It's reproduced in a book of travels from Shakespeare's time, and it shows a statue of the god Nilus, the god of the river Nile. And the inscription says this is a statue of Nilus, which the Roman Emperor Vespasian had removed from Egypt and taken to Rome. And it was actually placed in one of the temples of peace in Rome. And the inscription on the statue tells us it can now be seen in the Vatican. And indeed, it can still be seen in the Vatican today. It's an enormous statue of this male figure representing the god Nile. But he's surrounded by these sort of 24 little Cupid-like figures, suggestive of love and fertility. And all around are signs of the fertility that sprung up because you remember, the River Nile floods annually, and the whole of the agricultural economy of the region depends on that. The Nile flooding the banks, flooding into the fields, brings fertility. The irony of that statue is that actually it was made by a Roman workman. It's not, in fact, Egyptian. Shakespeare, of course, didn't see it. As far as we know, he didn't go to Italy. But many travellers in his time did. So they would have known about all the associations of Rome with statuary, with stone, with architecture. But Egypt was famous for the Nile, the river Nile. And one of the ways in which Shakespeare conveys the world of Cleopatra is through a series of images of Nile and Nilus. Now, something any Shakespeare student should get into the habit of doing is keeping an eye out for those key clusters of poetic imagery. And once you identify a pattern, then with modern digital search techniques, it's actually very easy to find all the examples of them. All you need to do is download a complete works, there's plenty of free access ones available on the web, onto your computer, and then start doing some word searches. Or indeed, you can do that online. There are a number of complete works freely available online, such as the one called Open Source Shakespeare. I've got my own edition of the complete Shakespeare here on my computer, and I've pulled up Antony and Cleopatra, and I'm just going to type in Nile, or at least Nil, so I get Nile or Nilus. And immediately I find a dozen hits giving me incredibly evocative images of the Nile. Early in the play, there's a bit of joking and playing between Cleopatra and her followers. And the character Iris, one of her followers, holds out her hand and says, "Here's a palm presages chastity, if nothing else." To which Charmian, another of Cleopatra's maidens, says, "Even as the overflowing Nilus presageth famine." They're being ironic. The palm is actually sweating. It's a sign of lechery, of sexuality, not of chastity. And the Nile, when it overflows, presageth not famine, but its opposite, fertility. The Nile is, of course, heated by the sun. Antony, who one feels ought to be swearing by Jove, the god of Rome, finds himself swearing instead by the fire that quickens Nilus slime. It's a line of his, an oath when he's speaking to Cleopatra. Fire, heat, passion, quickening. The image of quickening meaning bringing fertility, bringing life. Cleopatra quickens in all sorts of ways. Then when Antony is away, Cleopatra's wondering what he's doing, what he's thinking, and she says, maybe he's speaking now, or murmuring, "Where's my serpent of old Nile?" For so he calls me. So Antony's fond nickname for Cleopatra is Serpent of Old Nile. A bit later, when Cleopatra hears news that Antony has married a Roman woman, she's Octavius's sister, she's shocked, she's furious. She says, "Melt Egypt into Nile, and kindly creatures turn all to serpents." Shakespeare's very carefully dropping in references to Nile and to serpents, and he's doing that for a reason. Later in the play, there's a triumphal entry of all the Romans, and Antony says of the Egyptians, they take the flow of the Nile by certain scales in the pyramid. The higher Nilus swells, the more it promises. As it ebbs, the seedsman upon the slime and ooze scatters his grain and shortly comes to harvest. So the idea that the Nile has its annual overflow, then seeds are sown and the heat brings up plants. "You've strange serpents there," says Lepidus. Again, the theme of the serpent of the Nile. "Aye, Lepidus," says Antony. And Lepidus says, "Your serpent of Egypt is bred now of your mud by the operation of your son, so is your crocodile." So again, there's an image of the sort of exoticism of the Nile. But when all is lost, Cleopatra almost turns against the Nile. She speaks of how she will lie graveless till the flies and gnats of Nile have buried them for prey. "Rather on Nilus mud," she says, "lay me stark naked and let the waterflies blow me into abhorring." She would rather be a body on her own river Nile than be taken captive and paraded through the streets of Rome by Octavius and his army. And so it is that she decides to commit suicide, anything rather than be captured and humiliated by the Romans. A countryman comes with a basket, and she says to him, "Hast thou the pretty worm of Nilus there?" And of course, what he has in the basket is the asp, the poisonous serpent of the Nile, and she'll take the asp. "I wish you joy of the worm," says the countryman as he leaves, and then she'll apply the asp, the serpent of Nile, to her breast, and you get those beautiful lines. "Dost thou not see my baby at my breast that sucks the nurse asleep?" It's as if the image of fertility, of giving life, becomes an image of death. When the Romans arrive after her death, initially her body looks so perfect, they cannot understand how she's died. But then a guard sees an aspic's trail, fig leaves with slime on them, such as the aspic leaves upon the caves of Nile. A trace of the poison. The Nile then has been in the play from start to finish as the embodiment of the spirit of Cleopatra's Egypt.